Hi there. Hi, everyone. Hope you all had a good lunch and welcome back to everybody who's here. And welcome to everyone who's joined us on the live stream for this panel, which is about equalities. So my name's Cecilia Wee, and I am Head of Artist Development at Arts Admin, and we are one of the co-delivery partners of Unlimited. So I just wanted to check in that everyone is feeling good and that everyone is settling into this afternoon's session and feeling watered and refreshed by this morning's discussions. So the live stream, in case you're wanting to go on the hashtag is Unlimited Symposium, which is a shortened version of the word unlimited, capital UNLTD Symposium, and it's up there on the screen. As a host for this session, all I want to do is read out the topic and introduce your chair. So the session is Equality, Disability, Intersectional Identities, and the arts. Intersectionality looks at various aspects of identity, such as class, race, sexual orientation, disability, gender as interwoven. Where does disability sit within the dialogues around intersectional identities, identity politics, and the arts? Before I hand over to Sonia Dyer, who's our chair for this panel, I just wanted to audio describe myself. I am short, I've got an asymmetric bob haircut, I like bright clothes and bright patterned fabrics, and I'm of Singaporean Chinese descent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia, and welcome everyone to this afternoon's panel. Thank you to Cecilia and Joe for the invitation to join you today as well, and welcome to everyone who's watching via the internet. I should just also describe myself. I'm black, I'm I guess of medium skin tone, I have long hair, I wear glasses, and I'm wearing trousers and a t-shirt today. So I thought I would just really briefly introduce today's session because I really want to spend most of the time with our amazing panelists. But I thought I would just kind of trace some of the ideas that I explored in the blog that I shared as part of the introduction to today's session. And in my blog, I traced a very kind of partial and subjective history of the term intersectionality, which, as Cecilia mentioned, is a term that is used to describe the way in which various systems of structural oppression affect people who are marginalized within society in general. Just as a way of kind of understanding who's in the audience, can anyone let me know if you have heard of this term, intersectionality, before? Is it a term that you're familiar with? Ah, amazing. That doesn't always happen. So I'm glad it's happened today. I think we all are. I think that's where I'm kind of come from anyway. So just to kind of trace this history partially again, it's a term that is used a lot now in feminist discourse in particular, but its roots are within kind of black feminist and black queer feminist discourses. It was originally, well, it's coined by a group called the Combahee Women's Collective, which is a group of black queer women in the United States in the 1970s. But actually, we can trace the history of the term intersectionality, or at least the notion of intersectionality, much further back to, for example, Sojourner Truth with her speech, Ain't I a Woman, where she talks about being both black and a woman within the context of women's suffrage in the United States. And of course, many scholars since, such as, for example, Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term matrix of domination, or at least kind of introduced this notion of the intersection of various different forms of social inequality in quite a theoretical way. It then becomes used within queer studies, within class studies, and the kind of various intersections between all those things. So think about it as a series of layers rather than an identity formation that is about percentages, for example. And of course, nowadays, it's used a lot within contemporary feminism, or what I call capitalist feminism, where it's kind of used to sell us things. So you find, Beyonce using the term intersectionality whilst kind of selling the idea of a feminism that is about buying things. which again is a kind of interesting and kind of questionable legacy of all this radical work. So for today's conversation, I'd like us to kind of bear this radical history in mind, but also to ask ourselves and each other questions about disability and deaf culture's place within the conversations that are taking place around intersectionality, disability, and the arts. So some of the questions that I kind of posed in the blog, I would like for us to continue to talk about today is, can intersectionality be a useful tool in displacing the marginalization of all forms of so-called difference? That is, does it help us to collectively recognize that we all have identity? Even straight, white, able-bodied men have identity. We all do, and I think it's one of those things where identity is kind of foisted on people who are other or different, but actually we all have identity. And does thinking intersectionally raise the possibility of radical empathy and of solidarities across peoples? Or is it only relevant to some people? Or has it become, as it gets co-opted by capitalism, just another institutionalized and bureaucratic term that is going to be used to, put us in our little tokenistic boxes? So I would imagine there's a great deal of diversity of thought in the room amongst all of us, and certainly on the panel as well. And I think this is something that we should really welcome and embrace. And of course, we will disagree with each other in lively but respectful ways. I think on that note, I will kind of hand over to our first speaker. Our speakers have about 8 or 10 minutes each. I'll be keeping time, and Cecilia will be checking up on me as well to make sure that I'm keeping time. So I think we'll do well. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Marlene Leroux. Marlene is the CEO of Artscape Theatre in Cape Town, and she was the first woman and the first woman of color in this position. And thank you very much, Marlene, for kicking us off today.
Thank you very much, I must say, to Unlimited, and also to the panelists that's here. It's that I was very privileged in 2012. I was part of the Unlimited to look at least at starting at the South Bank with the Olympics, and just to see the journey again where you are. But I would, because I have limited time, I would like to introduce you also, and I've asked whether I can really do it. I would like to say thank you to Sophie that's here, that we've worked with mainstreaming at Artscape Theatre, because I'm the CEO of Artscape. I see myself more as a facilitator, because I say my work is about, I want to wear a t-shirt that say that a title is only your ego. And this is my premises that I'm going to start with intersectionality. I would like to say thank you also to the organizer of the Dada Festival that I had the honor, I've written a book in 2015 about Look at Me, with women with disabilities, and in particular to make women with disabilities that is empathizing, but also is the epitome of intersectionality. Because if you're an African, I'm an African woman in particular, I'm rural, I'm African, I am black, I had a child with a disability that just recently died, who has cerebral palsy. So the term intersectionality is much more broader than just the 3 aspects that was coined by academics as well. And also the living experience of being disabled in a black context, where it's not yet mattered the lives of persons with disability. And I contracted polio when I was 3 months old, because as I'm sitting here, I'm actually the dream of the new South Africa, because I grew up in the apartheid era. I can still smell the taste and the feel of where it is non-black and whites only that can enter the hospital. And those are the contexts that I'm talking to you about. Then we need to look at the disposition, and afterwards I would like to ask Cecilia if it's possible, that I would like to end off the session, if it's possible, because I would like to sing something for my son, because I think he was the light of so many mothers, so many parents, so many societies that I will end off with. So this, the book that I've started, Look at Me, the slide in particular. These women's lives were not easy. 4 of them died already because there was no resources and equity. Equality and equity means that we can be equal, but if I don't have the equity of resources, then we are not equal. And that is what we need to come to understand. With this brace that I have on, which cost me 60,000 rand, it's a lot of money. If that child is from the rural area and it's a woman and has no access to equal education, equal resources, how on earth can we talk about equality? And how on earth can we talk about equity? So you can't not put equality and equity together. I'm not yet even starting to talk about mainstreaming. It's a mindset globally that needs to change. Intersectionality. The next slide in particular, multiple identities. Oh my good grief, I just want you to smile. I'm talking to you as a human being. First of all, I want to be a human being. And to be ordered to be human being, I need to be given resources. I need to be first to be enabled, I need to be put in the middle. Am I correct? Comrade, I'm going to call you comrade because we are comrades. Our challenges have not changed because we're just here at Unlimited conference. Our challenges is on a day-to-day basis. I suffer post-polio syndrome. That's the 5th intersectionality. As you grow older, polio doesn't disappear. Polio gets worse. And that is what I want to say in itself, comrade, is that it's multi-layered. It's just not one aspect that we can talk about. So if you can see, it's about racism, it's about sexism, it's about classism, it's about colonization. My good grief. Decolonization. Just to come here, I need to pay a lot of money for my visa. I was not even yet here. You may laugh, people. And what is so important is to look at what is currently the resources, because even as a woman, when I've done this particular book, it was not favorable in my country or in my continent. Because how on earth can I put a gay woman who is black in lingerie or stark naked? People used to phone me. I was marginalized from the beginning because it's not. You can't be gay and you can't be disabled. It's too much for the world to understand. It's too much, okay? And the priestess and the pastors and the cultural myths that we are working with, it is too much to understand, because we just need to fit into the medical whole sphere. Social model doesn't even appear. Medical model, if you can get tablets and just, then you go. But this was just too much for everybody to be explained. But we just smiled, and then I will say to the pastor that phones me, you just looked at the picture, you never read our stories. And now we continue. The next slide. Africa's position. Today, I was very privileged to be part of the first session. And I want to say, you can argue in the UK from a privileged position. We argue from a total disadvantaged, marginalized position. So the arts we see as entrepreneurs, because on our continent, arts are not yet on our agenda. Disability and arts doesn't even feature. That's why I said in the previous session, the political willpower needs to be there. I was first appointed a little bit as a token. I said to myself, hey, I'm not going to be that token. I'm going to change. So I worked myself up to be the CEO of the National Theatre. So what happens is that 80% is artists with disability, and 80% is the theatre that needs to comply to artists with disability, and patrons and audiences that needs to face that a space needs to be accessible, not the other way around. That is why I'm saying where you are, you need to make a difference if you have that power, and not being on the blame side. I'm privileged as I'm sitting here. I'm privileged. So I need to use that privilegedness in order to make that particular change. So that is what I'm advocating wherever I'm going, and I would like you also to advocate that just for you to be here, you're privileged. So what changes are you currently making in the institutions that you are there? So I would like to say in our African position, equality and inequality is huge. How are you using it? We're just using it differently. I use the government stuff with affirmative action. I am the biggest affirmative action. They can't fire me yet. I make a lot of trouble, but they can't fire me yet because of the intersectionality. Our laws say there needs to be a black person. I'm black. There needs to be a woman. I'm a woman. The law said there must be persons with disability that needs a job. It's me. There must be, our law say, women that is rural must get a first position. It's me. I made a note to them. I am there. But I must make sure that other women, in my case, must also have a job, must also be part of the bigger scheme of life. I can't just come to a conference like this and can't say that I am not using my power to drive things where it is. Our biggest thing in our rural areas and all over is access to transport, access to flexible transport, access to affordable transport and education in particular. And what we're advocating now, so it's multiple layer. I don't just see myself being in the arts. I would like to state is that this is about empowerment and equity and equality on all levels. It's a mindset that needs to change in our society. Then when we talk about mainstreaming, we also need to ask in the UK, in Mexico, wherever, is there a person that is disabled that's on that board? Is there a woman? Who is on those boards? If you're not going to do that, you're going to sit still with this question, are we mainstreaming or are we not mainstreaming? And these are extremely important questions that you need to ask. And that is what we are doing currently in South Africa. It's not easy in Africa, it's not easy in South Africa, but these are the questions that we are asking and we're driving that. Lastly, I want to say is that I have developed with my studies an African model of disability inclusion. And as you can see, it's about activism. We all are activists as you're sitting here. You all are, whether we have a penis or a vagina, you're a feminist. If you don't want to know it, you mustn't be in here. Because first and foremost, if you can't be an activist for the most marginalized persons, and who's the most marginalized person? Is the young woman with a disability. She's the most marginalized person. So everybody in this room needs to become feminist. And when I talk about the intersectionality and the arts in particular, it's even more marginalized. Because it's also about all our leadership is also male dominated. And that is a change that we need to make as well. We need to say, how are we going to work together? How are we going to absorb, where we're going to say, even in our disability groups, who is leading that particular arts group? It's very uncomfortable. But if we're not going to ask those questions, we're going to ask the questions also about racism. Who's going to talk to me about black issues? I must speak about black issues because you're not in my shoes. If you're not disabled, I must lead that organization because I know my challenges. You don't know my challenges. You can be enough assistance, and I think that is the most important thing that we need to look. Oliver, there's just a little bit about emancipatory. We can become a slogan festival. We can become slogan driven. Then we have slogans without action. So it's about, for me, it's also about vision into action and driving it into emancipatory. So when I've looked at all of this, and thank you very much for the UK, for all your research that you have done, everything that you have done about disability and also about activism that's been driven to the policies that you currently have, is I could take those particular models and ask myself, how can we make it like an African model, but also research that is not just about PhD research, that is not, it's about us, but nothing about us without us. should be right through. And this nothing about us without us should be also in research basis, and not just for people to get a PhD, but what relevance is this PhD going to be at a university level to make the mindset change at tertiary level, starting from primary school upwards. We can't talk about mainstreaming of persons with disability if we're not talking about how are we assisting with an emancipatory mindset from a primary school, pre-primary school level. And those are the things that we need to drive. You are not going to be emancipatory role model when you're 40 or you're 50. And there comes the intersectionality. Chauvinism doesn't start when you're 50. Chauvinism starts in your household when you're pre-primary, in your household when you're 5 years old, when you're three years old. So what I want to end off is that when we're talking about an emancipatory research in an inclusive society, is a human being, as we're sitting here, what does a human being needs? Everything. Arts and culture is first. Secondly, we need the medical. We need the social models. We need all the models that you can get. Economics, education, transport, culture, entertainment, community development workers. We're advocating currently in Africa, in South Africa, because of our people in our rural areas needs to be where we need to look at how are you accessing the implementation of government's policy that's on the ground, because the policies has been written there, but it's been never tested on the poorest of the poor. Policy should never be like that. Policy should be where you first do your audit from the poorest of the poor, then you write the policy, and then you look at capacity, you look at resources, you look at equity, you look at whether that mother has access to the basic things, water, sanitation, education, and then you look at equality. If those things are missing, it's not relevant. And that is why on the slide you see it equals to relevancy. Conclusion, I've timed myself. You may laugh. The conclusion on this all is that a human being you can't just put into sections. It is about how the world has put you into section. You're not born with culture. You're not born with religion. You're not born with language. It's the community that enculturates you. And you're not born with racism. So, our job as activists for disability and intersectionality is to enculturate and to educate our communities about inclusivity. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. When are you running for president?
Oh, please. No, I must still fight the president.
We're going to move on next to Tariq. So Tariq Mutawakil, is that right?
I think as long as all the letters are in the right order, I don't really mind in this country how people pronounce my surname, as long as it's kind of phonetically mostly correct. Because I can't even pronounce my surname in Morocco how it's supposed to be pronounced. So there is some give and take. So letters, El Mutawakil.
El Mutawakil.
Yeah.
Well, Tariq is producer and events manager at the Marlborough in Brighton. And he actually worked his way up to that position from being a casual member of the bar staff, which is pretty much unheard of nowadays.
Sorry, I'm actually finding it quite hard to hear in this room, surprisingly. I have hearing aids. So can you repeat that? It's a bit
was just
echoey.
introducing you and saying...
No, just the very last sentence.
I was saying that you worked your way up from being
true.
a casual member of bar staff,
true.
and how unusual and almost impossible that seems to be at the moment. So without further ado, I hand you over to Tariq.
Okay, so hi, I'm Tariq. I'll do a quick visual description of myself. I'm wearing a cute little black onesie with shorts, some colourful shoes, and a Muslim little cap that was my dad's. And I found at home and thought, I'm going to start wearing this. So that's how I'm looking. And a kind of contemporary necklace with triangles and lines made by a friend. So that's kind of how I look. Oh yeah, mixed race, Moroccan, Dutch heritage, about 5'11". Smoky eyes. So, I work in the arts. I work at the Marlborough. I started working there in 2001 in the pub, and I pulled pints for 8 years with not much of an ambition. I was quite happy not having really much of an ambition because I knew what I could do. I could pull pints. At this time, I thought of myself as a queer person. Hadn't really considered my race actually at all. This is 2001. I felt like for a lot of people that conversation hadn't really started to bubble up yet. Particularly in the very white spaces that I was in, Sussex University, for example, especially studying psychology for some reason. So I carried on working in this pub. Lesbian, it was actually mostly known as a lesbian pub. And over the course of 8 years, well actually by 2008 basically, I decided after a very exciting festival, or summer of festivals, to take over the theatre with no theatre background. It was very much a kind of thing of just like, let's just see what we can do, what we can make happen. And I think that kind of spirit has stayed with me, was just kind of always been there. I'm fortunate for it, I think. And actually maybe because of that spirit, I've kind of maybe progressed in ways without realizing what barriers there were ahead of me. It's more recently, a few years ago, I was like, oh, it's brown o'clock inside and it's white o'clock outside. That's interesting. And then a few years ago when I went to get I got hearing aids when I was 25 after a family I was living with were like, I think that you might have hearing loss. And at the time, my response was, I just don't listen, okay? Because that seemed more comfortable to me at the time. Someone who had no experience of deafness or disability that I knew of. Turned out that I probably had always had hearing loss and that no one had spotted it, and that I was just particularly resilient or good at kind of doing other things so people didn't notice. And then, so that's been, so I started wearing hearing aids when I was 25. By the time I was 35, somebody asked me if I was on the disabled register. I was like, there's a register? So I'm on the register now. I have a bit more understanding about being a person with disabilities, and then during that period I also discovered that I have ADHD as well. Mash those two things together, you're really needing to concentrate to hear, and a concentration that is very wiggly-woggly creates some quite interesting intersections within disability. And that's been quite interesting for me recently, thinking about intersectionality within disability and how those two things create a whole new separate thing. I found it surprisingly hard to find any writing or people who have ADHD and hearing loss and can tell me about these things. So it was a lot of it my own personal journey of having to discover some certain things. One of the things I think that comes out of this particular intersection is something I call radiotaric, which is because it can be so hard for me to concentrate and hear what people are saying, I've learned, and I also am really sociable, I've learned how to kind of go into radio mode and every now and again take calls from the audience and then go back into being a radio host. So I worked my way up from working in a pub to deciding to take over the theatre. But very quickly became a place that a team formed, people who had actually had a theatre background, which was really helpful because I just had enthusiastic background, and a kind of like, we will make this happen background. We ended up as a queer theatre very quickly, and over time, it took a little while, it took a few years for us to kind of really get to know our queer identity, to recognise that queerness isn't this white thing that it looks like in Brighton, actually. And that by some of the work that we were presenting, some of the stuff that was coming up was actually exclusive to some people. It would make some people not want to be there or feel uncomfortable due to cultural appropriation, for example, which in 2010 was a new conversation again for our venue. And a really good challenge to be pushed up against. What I've kind of really tried to instill in our organisation is that when people challenge us, we listen. It's quite simple. And I think it actually is something that organisations and people and anyone with any kind of power or responsibility could do if we just listen, assume that the person knows what they're talking about, that they're not lying to you, that their experience is genuine. So we try and do that as much as possible within the Marlborough. I think there's always more to do. So I guess over time we understand ourselves as programmers and producers that we only will present work that has an intersectional perspective, or that an intersectional perspective has been kind of cast over it. So when someone comes to me and they have a show about feminism, for example, I program the Fringe Festival in my venue. So when someone writes to me and they've got a show about feminism, I will make sure that it's not a brand of white feminism that has mostly been put out in the world. I want to make sure that with the work that comes in, marginalized audiences are not going to be the ones who feel terrible in the room, or that might end up at the butt of a joke, of an ableist joke or a transphobic joke. And so there's been a much more intersectional perspective about how we look at things. And that's also kind of brought me to understand, I guess through intersectionality, understanding myself in many different ways. I'm also understanding myself as a whole authentic person. What parts of me make up the whole authentic thing, and who I am when I'm all of my parts put together, and I'm not hiding any of those parts. I'm not hiding the superpower that is my ADHD, or I'm not hiding my queerness or my amazing cultural heritage. I'm not trying to push any of those things. They're all present and everything is valid. I'm not hiding feminist or anything as well. It's quite hard to find those spaces. And so I created one from a vision of like, what would it be like if we centered otherness? What if we celebrated this whole feeling of being treated when you're, as you said earlier about too much, or too much. Someone on the Met on the weekend, their name was Too Much. They were tutu. No, too much. And the whole thing was about like, you can never be too much, actually. And I often feel that way. I often feel like maybe I'm too much. I'm minimizing myself, particularly in England. I went to New York and I was like, look at this sidewalk. I can like leap all over the place. So I'm really enjoying, so I made this place called Brownton Abbey that centers queer people of color, especially those with disabilities, as a way of seeing what happens when you make a different center. The event in itself is for everybody. Anyone can come. But it centers a particular group of people and says, this is our space. You are welcome. We set the rules. Here they are. Enjoy yourself. And it created a really wonderful, beautiful energy. Like people, they gave a lot of freedom. There was a lot more play there. It was experimental. It was a really mixed crowd. So I'm really personally at the moment very vibed by this whole thing of creating a weird. Brownton Abbey is this Afrofuturistic, space church-themed performance party for queer people of colour, especially those with disabilities, and I love it. The other day, I did something with Unlimited that was a section of that was even more focused on people with disabilities and learning difficulties, and babies, and adults with learning difficulties, and everybody was together having a weird alien space rave together. It was edgy and fun. I just want more of that in my life. That's me. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about at the moment. Thank you. It's also not exactly what I had on my list of notes, but...
That's all right. It's good to freestyle. Thank you so much, Tarek. We're going to move on to Sandy now. So Sandy is an artist who was born in Taiwan. She's going to talk a lot more about her practice, but she's also writing a dissertation on, I guess, the intersections of fashion and disability at the moment as well. Thank you, Sandy.
Okay. Is the mic working? Yeah. I don't say, can you hear me? Because if I said that, it's me making an assumption that everybody uses their ear to hear. So that's what I do. I'm a Taiwanese. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm wearing a white shirt and a pair of green pants patterned with blue butterflies. I have long black hair, and I was born with 2 digits on each limb. I tell kids that my fingers are like rabbit's ears. 12 years ago, my dear finger brother, Matt Frazier, He told me, in the UK, you give 2 fingers as the sign as fuck you. So to assimilate, I don't know if it is still true nowadays, but so to assimilate my hands to British culture, I guess that the audio description for my hand would be, I have a pair of fuck you hands. I'm a cisgender disabled woman artist born and raised in Taiwan. I went to the United States as a high school exchange student. I then stayed in the States for the rest of my education. Since 2006, I have worked in the arts, art therapy, disability activism, disability studies, and arts administration in both Chicago and Taipei. As someone who has navigated her multiple identities within multiple cultures and locations, I cannot emphasize enough how context matters. I'm going to share snippets of some conversations and comments that I have encountered to give you the context of my thinking. Image on the left, 2 East Asian disabled women born with 2 fingers, both with long hair and both wear black shirts, one from Taiwan and one from Japan. Each of them holds a sign with identical texts, except their names at the end. I am on the left, my sign says, same race, same gender, same disability, but I am not Akemi. And Akemi's sign says, I am not Sandy. Living in the United States as disabled women of color who share the same impairments, the joint presence of Akemi and I have confused a lot of people. We have encountered a number of people who just could not tell us apart. Some elderly white woman once complimented Akemi for my art while I was sitting right next to her. Our friend's friend, a white woman who grew up mostly in white suburban communities, once asked, "Do women from East Asia all have 2 fingers?" You might want to check other disabled women from East Asia today. Image on the right, the old photograph captured me at age 5 in Taiwan. I propped my upper torso out of the car window. I placed my right hand on my forehead as I squinted into the far away land with a wide open mouth. My father stood behind the car in dark sunglasses. To me, my childhood picture says curiosity and exploring the unknown. I recognize that intersectionality may be new, it may be big or even scary to some people. So I invite each of us to stay with the uncomfortable feelings as new ideas or difficult conversations arise today. Be curious, use your senses to feel with your body, mind, and or emotions, to taste and hold any reactions that might come to you. Let's raise questions, and I will be asking questions in my talk. And there will be time for discussion at the end. Next slides. You are so pretty. It's a shame that you only have 2 fingers. Such comment made me only hated the way I look as a child. As a young adult returning from the US to Taiwan, I had already come out as a disabled person, and I embraced the person who I was. Then I heard people said to me, "Now you're confident. You have overcome your disability. You can earn fame you can earn fame and money by showing your face, your impairments, alongside of your art." It took me a long time to connect with my identity as a woman. In the US, I was privileged to surrounded by radical disabled and feminist activists who taught me to be vocal, to be expressive, and to be angry at injustice. In Taiwan, my sense of social equality is often watered down. People said to me, "Oh, you're so optimistic about disability. You're just like the Americans," which is a quite stereotypical portrayal of American pop culture. When talking about self-acceptance as a part of the confronting the marginalized experiences, why do people assume that such identity formation is only individual psychological adjustments? How about social expectations that fall on disabled women of color? How about the expectations that fall on disabled women. Slide 3, next. Is there any disabled performers in Taiwan? I asked a cisgendered male producer and director. He paused. Yes, but we don't consider him as disabled because the work he produces is just as good, meaning as good as the non-disabled artist. He added, we just look at his body as a body on stage. Bodies are never just bodies on stage. I wonder, will the art producer change his response if the disabled performer is a disabled woman, a disabled and transgender person, instead of a cisgendered disabled man? How would it be possible to read man's, woman's, and trans body only as a body on stage? Is high-quality artwork an indicator for disabled artists to pass as able-bodied artists? A theater staff asked a non-disabled and cisgendered male art director for advice on disability terminology before a public forum. She asked, teacher, so this is the way that Taiwanese pay respect to speakers, professors, or people who have seniorities in their fields. Should we avoid saying disabled altogether? We don't want to make our audience uncomfortable. So he responded, well, let's just talk about art. Meanwhile, a self-identified disabled queer woman artist and I, 2 Crips with apparent disability, sat at the table. As I interjected my thoughts as a politicized Crip to the conversation described above, like I was writing, so I'm like right above, the room got quiet. Did I not know my place? Did I not know that I was considered young and ought to be quiet about my thoughts, especially in front of this senior arts practitioner? Of course I did. Did I make them uncomfortable? I probably did. Growing up in 2 cultures with my identity as a disabled woman artist, I quite often have to work through the uncomfortable feelings about other people's uncomfortable feelings about me. If my presence is meant to make people uncomfortable so we can start a conversation, I might as well do a good job and keep making people uncomfortable. Next slide. A white Caucasian woman who is a professional arts administrator and an expert in accessibility in the arts. She was invited to speak in Taiwan. Prior to her departure, she told a colleague of mine that Taiwan is really backwards for lacking access in the arts. Then she informed me that there's a huge budget for her talk and workshops. And I said, I'm glad to hear that there is funding available because whenever my colleagues, local disability activists, and I asked for support, we were always told that there is no money. I guess that I might have killed the conversation by stating the truth. She paused for a moment and said, anyways, it's an international free trip for me. I was speechless and appalled by this person's insensitivity and the way that she carries white superiority into the context of international exchange. For us, disabled people and disability allies, fighting for access is our activism, our life. It's never just a free international trip. Today, Unlimited Symposium has brought us all here. Next slide. I'm raising the following questions, and there are also things I'm still unpacking. How do race and class play a role as we share knowledge about access in the arts? And to revisit the snippets of the conversation in my talk earlier, what does that mean when arts practitioners in power take out the intersectional identity out of the art or the artist? So here's my talk. Thank you.
You said
Thank you so much, Sandy.
Thank you.
So much to think about. Particularly the kind of what happens when you make other people uncomfortable and the kind of work that you are then forced to do. I think it'd be great to kind of tease some of that out later as well. Our final speaker is Michael Turinsky. He's a choreographer, performer, and theoretician based in Vienna. Michael, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, let me begin by saying that I feel really delighted to be here and to be invited to this amazing symposium and to be around those fabulous people. Me personally, I need to start with a small confession, namely that this time it was actually not so easy for me to prepare myself for this panel because when I began thinking a little bit more deeply about our subject, our issue, intersectionality, intersectional identities, there was one moment when I was thinking, oh, fuck, actually, I'm really only labeled disabled. This is actually the main axis of discrimination, or the main axis, the main power relation that I need to face in my life, so I wouldn't feel myself so comfortable with claiming for myself an intersectional identity. This would not really, I wouldn't feel, it wouldn't feel right in a way. On the other hand, I think a lot about power relations, about social processes, social transformation, and so on. And so I need to be able to at least contribute something. So what I'm going to say is maybe a bit comes from a bit more abstract or broader perspective, and is maybe not so concrete or whatever. So I would like to start with the question, what is actually at stake for me in using this concept of intersectionality. And what is at stake for me is really that by using this concept, we are able to grasp the specificity of different social experiences. So we can, the concept of intersectionality for me allows us to acknowledge specific social experiences, like what does it feel, or what is it like specifically to be a gay man, a gay disabled man, or what does it specifically mean to be a queer person of color, or what does it specifically mean to be a disabled woman. So this is for me what's actually at stake in this concept. On the other hand, of course, there are also more problematic uses of the term intersectionality. On the one hand, it can trick us into constructing kind of hierarchies of victimization, like hierarchies of who is more oppressed, of who is less oppressed, and that would be for me an uncritical or problematic use of the term. And the other problematic use would be to construct a kind of whole monolithic story of oppression. Like, for example, I want to share with you a memory. A couple of months ago, I worked on a piece with 3 different performers, and I wanted to open up in the process a conversation about the resonances between our experiences of oppression, and then Damo, a queer person of color, they told me that they actually feel quite uncomfortable within conversations about intersectionality. Why? Because what they were saying is people include me into their own story of oppression. And I don't like that. I really don't like that. And that was a very important learning lesson for me, to be careful with kind of erasing the specificity of different experiences of oppression. Like, ableism is something different from racism. Ableism is something different from sexism, which of course does not mean that they would not be connected. Of course, they are connected deeply, but they are not the same. They still have autonomy, all those different relations of power. But in whatever way we might use this word or this concept, intersectionality, I believe that what we are actually articulating is a desire, I suppose, a desire for solidarity. And when we talk about intersectionality, in a way I feel we also always kind of have this desire to create spaces of solidarity. So let me say a few things about this concept or this practice of solidarity. People, when I raise this issue, people also often respond, hey, solidarity, this is really complicated concept and so on. And indeed, it is very complicated and it can be contextualized in very different ways. What I would like to do is to contextualize solidarity within some ideas about or around communism. I was asked to be provocative.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so let me, I would like to start with a quote, and then I will comment it. So the quote is by a French philosopher called Etienne Balibar. I appreciate him a lot, and I'm going to read a small section for you. So what he's writing is a quote. The communists are certainly participating in organizations and in the organization of movements, campaigns, or struggles, because there is no effective politics without organizations. However diverse their figure can or must be, depending on the concrete objectives. But they are not building any organization of their own, not even an invisible one. They are rather de-organizing the existing organizations, the very organizations in which they participate, not in the sense of undermining them from the inside or betraying their friends and comrades in the middle of the battle, but in the sense of questioning the validity of the distances and incompatibilities, very real most of the time, between different types of struggles and movements. In that sense, they essentially perform a negative function in the form of a very positive commitment. So this quotation resonates a lot with me, and also because in my work as a choreographer, there is a long tradition of defining choreography as organization of movement in time and space. Now, when I connect these two ideas, then I became more articulate in my own desire as a choreographer, which lies precisely in, for me, de-organizing choreography as a way of organizing movement in time and space. So the point for me as a choreographer is to de-organize choreography so that a radical variety of bodies can come together within one space. But this coming together of bodies of radically different bodies, this coming together is possible precisely only by and through de-organizing established ways of organizing movement. So this was my key point.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm kind of feeling that maybe I should rebel slightly because we're literally supposed to leave this room now, but I wonder whether there's time for a couple of questions I think that we can all address together, and also I'm aware that Mani would like to interject. Is that possible? Maybe one question? How many? Yes. Yeah. Okay, well let's take a question. Phone.
Hopefully, we'll be able to have more time for discussion in our breakout groups. And, you know, we'll be, all of the panelists will be going into different places. So we'll be able to kind of ask more of the questions and, yeah, do all that then.
I just want to thank you for your labor. I think this is one of the key things, particularly thinking about intersectionality and thinking about people of color, disabled people, like the multiple intersections, the amount of labor it takes to do that work, particularly this time. So I just want to say thank you for that, because I think in these spaces, these voices are voices that are necessary and essential in building a kind of sustainable ecology around what diversity supposedly should be. And I think intersectionality is one of the key moments and mechanisms. I guess I want to ask you to think about what happens in the act of dealing with the labor of that. Because as you talked about everyone being activists, I don't know if I have the energy and effort to continue to be that active, nor should I continue to take on that. And I think that's one of the things I think that comes with thinking about the nuances of intersectionality, is the weight of the labor that comes with talking about this work and doing the work. And so I wonder how we might address and navigate dealing with intersectionality in a way that does not put the labor on those folk who continue to be the people who are the driving force of having the conversation. That's kind of what I want to ask and offer.
Okay, is that working now? Okay. So the image of me and Akemi, that was our way to address the emotional labor, and because it's always really exhausting to educate and to be expected to educate and to be patient with people who are from more privileged identity groups. And my personal strategy has been transforming from, yes, I want to make art so people can appreciate me as a human being, as a person, but not talking about disability. Two, yes, I just want to talk about like my disability, but I'll also, right now, I'm like, you know what? I don't really care about non-disabled people. I'm just gonna make art for my own people. And I'm not feeling like this is going to pigeonhole me or anything, but because I'm seeing like disability art for me is a way of articulating a new art movement within our history, and we are building history together. So a lot of time, I think what helps me is knowing that I am making art for and with, about my Crip sisters and brothers. So that's what helps me to sustain my work.
Disability is very personal for me. And it's also about, I fully understand, it is about energy. It is a commitment of my life. To be black, come from very poor background, I don't have the luxury just to be an artist. I use the arts as a vehicle to get out with my people, to government, to spearhead, to make them aware what is the necessity for persons with disability just to have access to be alive and to have equality and equity. So the arts is one part, but to use the arts, and I use the arts to drive it home about everybody needs to have a place, a job, access to education and health. So it's not a luxury for me. So intersectionality, what we have discussed here, it is not just a term, it's a way of living. So I can't just go sleep at night and say, I'm going to be this artist with this voice. No. The time is not yet for me. What I need to use is to use the space to get out to government and to be that activist.
Thank you, Marlene.
I mean, my response regarding how to deal with the emotional labor of the work that I'm doing, and also maybe the advocacy that I'm doing, the response that I will give you is a kind of, yeah, of course, just one response. And my response is, I couldn't only do what I feel is good to do. I could not do it. I need to have a personal, subjective desire to do something, or to find pleasure in something. I think for me, finding pleasure in what you do is what sustains me in my work. And I need to find this thing that I find pleasure in. Because when I'm only playing Michael, the angel who is doing good things, I could not go on with doing it. I need to find a subjective desire in what I'm doing, a subjective urgency, a subjective pleasure that is really mine in a way.
Thank you, Michael.
I wanted to say that existence is resistance. So just the mere fact that we are here, breathing, existing, that's already activism, actually. The fact that we may be getting out of bed, if it feels right for our bodies, if our bodies are saying, all right, get out of bed. For me, I feel that's already activism. The world that is stacked against you in every single sort of way, just getting up and getting out the door, if that is what you can do that day, is a form of activism. You don't have to be on the streets or making art about disability to be an activist, or to be doing something that is pushing back against the paradigm. We all have our different ways. There are people who are making art and have the energy to do that. Great. If you're not doing that, you can still consider yourself an activist. I think if you understand that your existence is political, that your body is political, and that you taking your body wherever you can is political, that's a form of activism. And hopefully one with, and then within that's up to you in terms of levels of how much your own kind of, well, actually it's not always up to you, the levels of work that we have to do. The labor we don't get to choose. So actually, because the labor isn't up to us, look after yourself. Your self-care is activism. Having a nice long bath, not doing all that work that someone is saying, this needs to be in now. If that's actually going to make things terrible for you, actually just knowing yourself, what your needs are, I feel that's a form of activism.
Thank you.
I think that we have to, in the spirit of self-care and collective care, I think we have to break now. And we're going to give Marlene an opportunity to sing later. Definitely. But
my son died just before his 16th birthday, and I just want to share that with you quickly, because I think it's so important that people asked me when my son died, and they said to me in particular, and it's so about this, what we talked about, is that he's in a better space. They forgot that I was his mother. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you, because it's a safe space. It's the words that you say, people just so tell you. And he was my light. And I want to end off the session, because I've asked whether I can end off the session. And just to sing and to say that the light was within him. And not because he was disabled that he was special to me. I just want to make it very clear. When you're disabled, it doesn't say you're special. He was a human being. And he deserved to be on this earth. And that is why I wanted to end the session with this. Môre gaan die son weer skyn, ligwolke sal dan verdwyn. Adam sal die lig weer wees, want hy is mos 'n koningskind. Môre sal die son weer skyn, miswolke sal dan verdwyn. Stormwinde dan sal stil, want jy is mos 'n koningskind. Jy is mos 'n koningskind. Every life matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene, for sharing that with us. And thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Tarek, thank you to Michael, thank you to Sandy, thank you to Sonia. You can read more about Sonia's work as an artist and writer and curator on the Unlimited blog, as well as all of the panelists from today. So we're going to now go for a short break. And then after that, we will have the breakout groups in the same format as before. So here are the options. There's the Western Theatre, which is in here with Michael, Marlene, and Sandy. And then on the ground floor in the Claw Theatre with Sonia. And then upstairs on the top floor in the foil rehearsal room with Tarek. And then downstairs with me in the basement in the JLR meeting room. So the groups will start in, do I have someone who can tell me what time they start at, please? They start now at in 10 minutes time. Thank you very much, Fiona, thank you. And refreshments will be available in each of the rooms. You can go to the same discussion group as you went to before, or a different one, depending on your access needs. And also, if discussions aren't your thing, then you can go and find a collaborative art installation in the ground floor dressing room, as well as the cards for inclusion downstairs in the basement. Have a good break. See you soon.